oh, you're just a TEFL teacher.
Yeah.
And I hate that.
Ditto.
Because, there's so much more than, TEFL teaching and English teaching. And, it's a great career and it is a professional career.
TEFL, CELTA, Delta, TESOL. What does this all mean? How do they differ? One had the Delta, one had the CELTA, and one had the TEFL. Who are you choosing and why?
There is still discrimination, and this has been a real hot topic for the last few years, the whole native versus non-native.
Do you think someone who does not see themselves as a teacher can actually make a good teacher? Welcome to Avocado Jobs, your go-to resource for ESL teachers. Whether you're looking for career insights or insider tips, this is the place for you. We aim to give you invaluable information and insights from experts. And navigating today's episode is Glenn Standish, giving us the inside scoop on how to choose the right TEFL certification for you. Our guest today has truly lived a global life. For over 22 years, he's been shaping the minds of English learners in Poland. And for the last 11 years, he has been the Director of Studies at International House Toruń, helping countless teachers and students alike. But his impact doesn't stop there. He's also a tutor, a course moderator, and inspector, ensuring the highest standards in English education worldwide. And if that wasn't enough, he shares his expertise and insights in the EFL conference circuit. Our guest today, Glenn Standish. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi.
Tell everyone a little bit more about yourself and who you are.
Yeah, so I have been teaching English for over 22 years, but not just teaching English. As you mentioned, I'm the Director of Studies at International House Toruń. And I'm absolutely super passionate about English teaching as a profession and everything about it.
We look forward to hearing your insights. I do have to know, did you always want to be a teacher?
No, I actually wanted to be a film director, and strangely, I still do. So this is the next level, being interviewed on a podcast. From the age of 3, I wanted to be a film director. And I guess I am a director. I'm a director of studies. Yeah, sad times. No, it's great. So no, but I came to Poland 22 years ago, and then in those days in Poland, being somebody who didn't speak Polish, the only profession I could go into was teaching English. So that's why I ended up teaching English.
Wonderful.
Kind of by accident.
A happy accident.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. For a lot of our listeners, TEFL is what they aspire to do. But as we know, TEFL is an umbrella term. So could you define what TEFL stands for and what falls under that umbrella?
Well, TEFL stands for Teaching English as a Foreign Language, which means everything, really. And it's a huge umbrella term. But a lot of people do get confused by that because when they want to do their initial teaching qualification, there are a lot of so-called TEFL courses. These tend to be mainly online. Some can be face-to-face. And they basically varying degrees of quality. And don't get me wrong, some of them are very, very good. But some of them, the individual will learn how to teach without actually being in an actual classroom or actually being observed teaching. And for me, that's very much like learning to drive a car without actually being in the car. So, how can you expect to learn to teach English without actually being in a physical classroom? Mm-hmm. So some are better than others. That's TEFL as in a TEFL course. But yeah, people say, they ask you, oh, are you a teacher? And you're like, oh, yes, I'm a teacher. And they're like, so what do you teach? And you say, okay, I'm an English teacher. And they're like, oh, you're just a TEFL teacher.
Yeah.
And I hate that.
Ditto.
Because, there's so much more than, TEFL teaching and English teaching. And, it's a great career and it is a professional career. But sadly, it does have sort of a bit of a negative stigma attached to it.
I think with all the travel aspirations as well as the different assortment of qualifications you can get, especially those that dwindle down in terms of quality, the space is saturated with just TEFL teachers.
Yes.
When in reality, as with anything else, it is a career one can be passionate about as well as educated on and have an in-depth knowledge on.
But that's because, you know, a lot of people get into TEFL purely because they want a busman's holiday around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, it's a ticket to travel, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why I think there was that negative stigma attached to it, because people just perceive, it's just a ticket to travel and it's not a proper teaching profession.
Mm-hmm.
And I've encountered teachers who just say, I want to become a proper teacher. And they're like, what do you mean? You are a proper teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sad. So there's so much more to teaching English, really.
So before we talk to our English experts and those desiring a teaching career, if someone is looking to travel, country hop a little bit, and wants to do it with a little extra money in their pocket, would you say the TEFL certification is a good route to go down?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I don't want to diss TEFL, but I think you've got to be careful because there are different types of TEFL. There's TEFL level 3, teaching qualification level 3, level 5, and teaching qualification 3 is fine if they want to go to certain countries. I believe somewhere in Asia, like
Mm-hmm.
China, somewhere like that, is absolutely fine. But then when they want to get more serious and they see it as a career, then you definitely need to go and get a level 5 teaching qualification.
Okay, you mentioned level 3 being the entry level. What time commitment does that look like? What's the time commitment?
It depends on the course. And really, you know, that can be from 4 weeks going, you know, that's like a full-time course. It could be 12 weeks part-time course. So it really depends on the course. And, you know, people really have to research
Mm-hmm.
to find a really good TEFL course, because there are companies which will offer very attractive prices,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily good quality courses. And I do feel sorry for people who take some of these courses because they end up still spending quite a lot of money, at least $200-300. So it's still not that cheap.
Mm-hmm. When we're looking at financial investment and being able to gauge what is value for money, what price range are we looking at here? And how does one know that this is a good TEFL course versus one that isn't?
That's a very good question. And they don't really. But I think, you know, you need to look into the factors. Does it include teaching practice? You need to have at least a minimum of 6 hours observed teaching practice, albeit online or face-to-face, whatever. But yeah, you need to have that aspect. And I think, you know, if the course does offer observed teaching practice, then you're starting to look in the right place.
Okay. Observed teaching practice.
Yes.
Fundamental, observed teaching practice. What kind of jobs does the basic TEFL qualification open doors to, if any?
As I mentioned earlier, jobs in places like China, in Asia, in certain private language schools, it would open doors. But even then, there will be some schools that will not accept. And also there will be certain countries, you know, like in the Middle East, for example, where you need to have a degree.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's all very well going to get, you know, a TEFL qualification, but if you don't have a degree, then there's no point. So, you know, it all depends on the country that you want to go to.
Okay.
So basically, there's so much research that the individual has to do beforehand, for sure. So you need to research the course. You also need to research the actual requirements for that particular country that they want to go to.
Fair enough. And this degree, does it have to be related to English?
No. I mean, it'd be great if it was, but no, not at all.
Wonderful.
No.
Okay, so a degree coupled with TEFL is a good start.
It's a good start.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
One of the common misconceptions is that all TEFL courses are the same. And you've mentioned the research required when doing this. But terms that are thrown out are TEFL, CELTA, Delta, TESOL. What does this all mean? How do they differ?
Yeah. Well, TESOL is teaching English to speakers of other languages. You know, the world of TEFL is full of acronyms. I personally absolutely loathe acronyms. But yeah, CELTA, TEFL, everything is an acronym these days. There's also, like, you know, in the US, I think it is also TESOL, but also Trinity in the UK offers the Trinity Cert TESOL course, which is pretty much the equivalent to the CELTA.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you see yourself really wanting to go down a career path and start on a good path,
Mm-hmm.
I do strongly recommend taking the CELTA.
You mentioned CELTA. What is it exactly?
CELTA is a Cambridge teaching qualification. It stands for Certificate of English Language Teaching to Adults.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's very much focusing on adult teaching, but as we both know, that's only a very small sector of teaching. The younger learner market now is huge, and so it doesn't prepare you for teaching younger learners. And quite often, teachers post CELTA or TEFL will end up, for sure, guaranteed they will end up teaching younger learners and teenagers, and most of the time are just thrown in at the deep end. But there are courses now. CELTA used to do a YL extension. I believe I'm not sure if they still do that. But for example, International House, where I work for, they offer the IHCRT, another acronym, which stands for the International House Certificate of Younger Learners and Teenagers course. Mm-hmm. So there's all those aspects. But going back to CELTA, it's initially, if you do it intensively, it's a 4 to 5 week course, depending on the school. The center, sorry, the CELTA center. And it used to be pre-COVID, just face-to-face courses. So obviously there is an expense involved because, you have to travel to the place. You have to find your own accommodation. That's all extra on top. And these courses are not cheap. I would say like a benchmark's around £1,000. Give or take. It depends on the school. It depends on the country as well. So of course, like a CELTA course here in Poland, because obviously the accommodation stuff is a little bit cheaper, not so much now with inflation, but it's still a bit cheaper compared to like somewhere like the UK. Mm-hmm. So there's all those factors you have to think about. But now, post-COVID, you can actually do CELTA online. Of course, there is still teaching practice involved as well.
So you said that a lot of qualified CELTA teachers end up going into teaching teenagers or children as their first experience. Would you say, 1, they're overqualified for that role, and 2, it's perhaps maybe a good starting point for uncertain teachers?
Not at all. I don't think they're overqualified. Far from it, because there's so much more you need to know when it comes to teaching younger learners. Mainly classroom management is the key. And I think there might be one module or one session on the CELTA which briefly covers teaching younger learners. But no, you're definitely not overqualified. But it's still good to start with a CELTA course. And I personally, and I don't want to diss TEFL, but really, if you want to go and teach and you want to be in a reputable school, go and get the CELTA. That's my recommendation.
Get the CELTA. You heard the man.
Ready to meet your career goals? Create your profile at avocadojobs.com and start connecting with high-paying job opportunities. It's fast, fun, and your next big move is just a click away.
Okay, so CELTA, if I want to pursue teaching, then what on earth is a Delta?
Okay, Delta is the diploma in English language teaching to adults. Also, it's provided by Cambridge. Okay, so you have CELTA, which is the certificate, very much first entry, initial entry, and then you have Delta, which is diploma. They recommend, and obviously this is not set in stone, but they do recommend to be teaching full-time for at least 3 years post-CELTA before you go on and do the Delta. Now, the Delta is for those who really see teaching English as their full-time career.
If I had a potential candidate, or 3, and I presented their CVs to you for a junior teacher at International House, one had the Delta, one had the CELTA, and one had the TEFL, who are you choosing and why?
That's a great question. And there's so many factors because, often I get applications from people who have a lot of experience, years of experience. But you look at those CVs and they might just be like either going from one school to one school to one school, and they don't stay long in those schools. You can ask yourself
Not a good
why.
sign.
Yeah. They can be very much set in their ways without any development. So it's great, years of experience, but also I think also development. So on paper, yeah, great. 10 years experience doesn't actually mean everything to me. So obviously if they got Delta, that's a good start, definitely. But then there's also CELTA. And yes, I would choose somebody who has CELTA over somebody who has an online TEFL certificate. Here at International House, we have a system, it's a points system. You need at least 100 points to work at an international school anywhere in the world. Now, if you go and get the CELTA, that is straight away 100 points. Delta is also an extra 100 points. So if you get CELTA and then Delta, you've got 200 points immediately. Yeah. So you need the minimum of 100 points to work at an international house school. Having said that, that doesn't mean you can't work at international. You just have TEFL. TEFL depends on the type of TEFL, because we talked about earlier, there's so many different types. It could be like 20 points. It could be a bit more, but then you can make up your points by attending development sessions, extra courses and things like that. So you can start with less than 20, but build up. As long as you get 100 pretty quickly, that's fine.
Okay. You mentioned development.
Yes.
And I would hope everyone that is listening is into development and is in this sphere because they want to develop. But what development courses could one couple with their TEFL certificate to make their CV more attractive?
Okay. I mean, we have continuous professional development, CPD. It's a really important part. So, with any sort of initial teaching qualification, including CELTA, I strongly recommend that you go to a school, you get yourself and find a school where they really do invest in CPD. Like, I don't want to plug it, but International House Toruń. We do. I mean, we have weekly sessions. In fact, this morning we had a session with Tom Jones, not the singer, but he's quite a well-known, shall we say, TEFL celebrity. And so, we do provide training input sessions, usually on a weekly basis, for the teachers. But there are more formal, official courses you can do, like, as I mentioned, like the Younger Learner Extension. But, International House, they actually have an online teacher training institute, which another acronym, it's called OTI. And they actually do provide a lot of extra CPD courses that teachers can sign up and do. Obviously, there are fees involved. One of them would be the IHCRT course. Another one would be the IHCAM course, which stands for the International House Certificate of Advanced Methodology, which acts as a really nice bridge between CELTA and Delta. I did my Delta. I did the last of the pre-modular Deltas many moons ago, about 15 years ago. And sometimes I felt like I was literally thrown in the deep end. It was like hitting a brick wall because there was so much new terminology that I never even heard of before. And so the CAM course is a really nice way of learning the terminology before you go on to do the Delta.
Is there anything you'd specifically like to touch base on? I know that you are a fan of CELTA. If people were to take something away from anything that you're sharing with them, what do you want them to know about CELTA?
I just think it's a quality course, and the tutors are well qualified. And most of the tutors probably would have done the CELTA course at some point. Most of them will probably be, I think you have to be Delta qualified in order to teach CELTA, but don't quote me on that. But they will be very experienced tutors. Some of them are actually quite well known. I think, as I mentioned before, like CELTA very much puts people on the right path. It's not perfect, but it puts them on the right path for sure. It's not perfect in the sense that, all these qualifications, okay, maybe not Delta, but they are literally, short courses. And, how much can you actually learn on such a short course, which is why CPD courses are so much, so important. For example, a Polish person might go to university and they might actually train for 3 years in a special, teaching college. And, if you look at that. They are incredibly qualified, 3-year course. And then, I remember in the old days, when I first started, people would say, well, hang on a minute, Polish teachers say, well, I've got this qualification, it's proper, like, I can teach in state schools. It's a 3-year qualification. And then somebody with CELTA, just because they were native, rocks up after a 4-week course. And I can see why certainly a lot of people, Polish people, could be any country, to be honest, were kind of looking down on that CELTA thing because it is just a 4-week course.
And would you say today, a native speaker versus a non-native speaker who both possess a TEFL are looked at the same way?
They should be, but sadly, they're not. There is still discrimination, and this has been a real hot topic for the last few years, the whole native versus non-native. And really now, I'm strongly in the non-native camp. I think, non-native speakers, I don't even want to use that term, are very, very good teachers, a lot of them, because they have been students of English themselves. They have been in the shoes of the student and they learn how to learn the language. So when it comes to things like grammar and things like that. So sadly, here in Poland still, I think, and in a lot of countries, there is this stigma where this mindset, where the client still thinks that a native speaker is gold dust, and it's like, but it's not.
No, because someone who understands any language from a fluent level, there is nuance in conversing and using the language versus understanding it from a linguistic perspective or an academic knowledge. So I wish the stigma didn't exist.
I think, it is gradually diminishing. At IH Toruń, we do have quite a few non-native teachers from other countries. But we always say native level, yes, when they ask. But yeah, sometimes it's the first thing when they come, a new client comes to the school to enroll for the year. It's like the first question, will my teacher be a native teacher? Which is kind of sad.
I concur, especially when I think of the level of native English. It's like, a lot of native speakers don't know English at a native level.
No, it depends on, the region, the dialect, the accents and everything. Somebody from Newcastle or Glasgow, I would, find it very difficult in the pub, if, for example, to hear what, they're actually saying, especially when they're talking very, very quickly. But I think gone are the days, sadly, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of language schools here in Poland would employ Joe Bloggs off the street purely because they were a native speaker with no teaching qualifications. And I found that sad, especially when they were calling themselves an English teacher. And I'm thinking, well, no, you're not an English teacher at all. Story, I know somebody who would go to the lesson and basically sit down with the students and say, right, what should we talk about? Well, obviously the teacher should know. There should be a framework. There should be a plan for the lesson and steer the students. There is Scott Thornbury and Luke Meddings coined the term dogme, which is very much, teaching unplugged, where you go in and you don't really know. But I think in that case, it was, the guy was ringing it. Winging it. We can cut that.
Ready for the next game-changing tip? Click subscribe, turn on notifications, and be the first to know when we drop the next episode.
Something you mentioned earlier was about development. So anyone on paper can possess a TEFL certification of sorts. What soft skills do you think would accompany someone who's going to delve into being a teacher?
Well, I think first of all, you need to be you need to be a bit of a leader in class. And it's good to have that positive personality. I'm not saying to be a complete extrovert, but you need to be somebody who gets on well with people, first of all, and, brings that little bit of spark and energy to the class, because what you don't want is a boring lesson.
Yes. Can someone be taught how to bring spark to a class?
Difficult. It's difficult. Some of these things are quite natural, but yeah, I think over time you can, yes.
Do you think someone who does not see themselves as a teacher can actually make a good teacher?
Absolutely. And I think everybody has their own teaching persona, their own teaching personality. Sometimes people are very different in the staff room than they are. And to be honest, it's kind of like being an actor. The classroom is your stage, and the students are your audience, to a certain extent. And that's actually one of the questions I ask when I interview prospective candidates is describe your teaching persona in the classroom.
Oh, what are some interesting answers that you've gotten there?
What's a
standout for you? What are you looking for when you ask that
somebody
question?
says that, that's a good question. Somebody who's, I just said, you don't have to be an expert, but maybe, somebody who's confident in the classroom, but also somebody who listens to the students. I think that's so, so important, and not dominating the classroom. Because yes, you can be a showman. I would say I'm a bit of a showman when I'm in a classroom, but I wouldn't say I dominate the class. I think it's very, very important because quite often it's perceived, the teachers in the room, they're the ones doing all the talking. That's not the case. CELTA actually trains candidates to reduce teacher talking time in the classroom. And International House very much promotes the communicative approach where we are trying to increase the student talking time as much as possible. So you don't want somebody who completely dominates the class, and you want somebody who interacts with the students and tries to get them talking as much as possible.
Wonderful. So CELTA does have components that are not just academically aligned.
Of course. Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's good for our audience to know, because it seems as though on paper you have the certificate, as with a degree, that you are qualified in. But realistically, how does that prepare you for real life?
Well, very much. Yeah, it's difficult. And, CELTA now can be online. And that can be an issue where somebody's learning to teach online, which is a whole different ball game compared to what it's actually like in the classroom. And post-COVID, I have actually hired teachers who did CELTA online. I mean, obviously during COVID. Did I say post-CELTA or post-COVID? I can't remember.
Post-COVID.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's good. Okay. That's exactly what I wanted to say. Because during COVID, CELTA was only online. And so there was a time where all the candidates had just been taught how to be a teacher online. And then they were expected to be in this classroom, this 3-dimensional room with real students sitting there. And it was difficult. It was very, very difficult. Because teaching online versus teaching in a face-to-face scenario is completely different.
The skills it takes teaching in person seem to be transferable for someone who transitions into online teaching.
Yeah.
What tools would you recommend to someone that has only had the online teaching experience and now wants to dive into teaching in person?
It's very difficult. I mean, there are lots of webinars out there you can watch and things like that. But I would just try and get yourself in that classroom as soon as possible. Don't be afraid about it. But I've had teachers in the past who've quit purely because they found it very traumatic being in a real life classroom.
Wow.
Which goes back to TEFL. Where there is no teaching component quite often. So I think, first of all, you've got to do a teaching course that does have some form of teaching component.
Okay. I'm shocked, but not surprised, which this doesn't make sense. But that people have quit teaching because they were so overwhelmed by the difference between online and in-person teaching.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I can't fathom what it would take to be in that headspace. Do you think many were impacted by that transition post-COVID?
Possibly, yes. I mean, I'm just talking, a minimum number of individuals. But, that's from my point of view. Maybe other schools have also experienced that as well. But things are different now. I mean, I think a lot of CELTA courses are now face-to-face. But obviously, candidates do find online still attractive because, and also schools do, CELTA centres do, because it's quite lucrative because obviously they can, the pool is international, it's worldwide. They can get candidates from anywhere.
Yeah.
And so, often, it is more attractive for the candidate as well just to join the CELTA course from the comfort of their own home. Yeah. But then there are distractions as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, take into consideration this popularity and the attractiveness of online teaching and going into the future, pairing that with AI. Will there still be a need for an English teacher in the classroom?
Absolutely, yes.
Tell
You know,
me
the
why.
question everybody's saying, is AI going to take over the
Yes.
world? I can see why they think. I see AI as being a practical supplementary tool for teachers. And already teachers are using it. I mean, I've used it minimally. Very good, for example, like when I want to create some text with certain target language for a test or something like that, it will instantaneously provide me the text within seconds, which is brilliant. I know some teachers using it for like writing reports and things like that. And I think that's not right, because I think reports have to be personal for that individual student. So I think there are pros and cons. Why do I think? I think, you know, people just still want the human touch.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that.
Fair
You know,
enough.
but I think, you know, we can blend it together somehow.
Okay. Human and AI
Yeah.
living as one.
Yeah.
Going forward, this perspective of English teaching, considering how popular English is becoming across the globe, AI component removed, will there still be a necessity for a good English teacher if kids and adults alike are learning it as their second or third language at school?
Yeah, I think there is always a need to really improve on your level of English. I mean, here in Poland, for example, when I first came here 22 years ago, not many people did speak English. In fact, when I was speaking in English on the streets, people would stop and look at me and go, oh, you know, who are you, this celebrity? You know? Now things are completely different, because obviously since Poland joined the European Union, English is taught in state schools. It's not as exotic as it used to be. So I think, I think there is still going to be a need for English, because high level students still need, you know, to learn the vocab, you know, the nuances and the idiomatic language, the colloquialisms, which you can really get from a teacher, I think. And, you know, you can reach a high level like C1, for example. But if you don't continue using that language, you're going to forget it. Years ago, I had a student who was sort of like B2 first certificate. And unfortunately, they stopped using it. And when I saw them again about a year and a half later, they were like A2. So you can lose it. So I think it's important to constantly maintain it. And I think the best way to do that is with a real English teacher.
Not an AI bot.
No. I mean, of course, there's things like Duolingo and things like that, which are great, you know, but, you know, great on one aspect, but on the other side, you know, those sentences that you're learning are absolutely meaningless, pointless. I don't need to know about some fish or swimming or whatever, you know, it's just, you know, why do I need to know that? I need like good language skills, you know, and unfortunately my Polish is absolute rubbish. Yeah. I mean, it's awful. I mean, I've been here 22, 23 years. I know things like rapucha, which is toad, and węgorz, which is eel. But how can I have a conversation about a toad and an eel? You know,
You can't.
no. But
Unless you're
that's the
talking
thing.
about żabka, then
Yeah, exactly. So that's the same with, you know, with high level students. You know, they might know these good words, you know, random words, but they need to know a lot more. And I think, you know, you can really improve it by being in an actual English class. Yeah.
So an English teacher makes things tangible and accessible and applicable to real life.
Yeah.
Which is good. Our jobs are safe. Okay, we're going to look at our certifications in a comparative way. I will give you the comparison and you'll enlighten us on what the differences
I'll
are.
try.
Okay, so in regards to time taken or amount of time to invest, when we compare a TEFL to a CELTA, what are the differences?
I think they are quite similar. You know, it depends. Some TEFL courses sort of like also 4 weeks. Some can be longer. And it's very much the same with CELTA. I think the minimum for a CELTA course is 4 weeks. Intensive. 4 intensive weeks.
In person?
in person. And during those 4 intensive weeks, you just have to forget about civilization and really have to focus just on the course. But you can do it part-time. Same with the Delta. I did my Delta course. It was pre-modular. We'll talk about that later. But I did that part-time over a year, started in September, October, and it ended in June. So it was pretty much one European academic year at least.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in terms of cost, how do they differ?
Yeah.
And is a higher price worth the investment?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, TEFL can start from, sort of a couple $100, but it can also go up to, over $1,000, I think. Earlier I said CELTA was about £1,000. Maybe that was wishful thinking. That was quite some time ago. I think, now it could be like, 1,500, if not more. But I think, you got to ask yourself, look, do I want to be a professional teacher? And if so, you do need to invest. Simple as that. And I think, CELTA's definitely, I don't want to be like pro CELTA, but it's definitely the right one to start with, the initial one. And with CELTA as well, you get the final grade. It's either pass or it's grade B or grade A.
Mm-hmm. And between those gradings, when that is presented on a CV, will someone that simply got a pass be passed on?
Absolutely. For me, I'm quite happy to take on somebody with a CELTA pass. I know there are some schools who would only employ somebody with a CELTA A, possibly a CELTA B, but I can't really avoid that. I can't afford that. I'm actually fine with somebody with CELTA pass. And earlier you mentioned about people with experience. You presented with a CV with like 10 years experience. Quite often, I prefer to employ somebody straight off CELTA as opposed to somebody like that, because they are quite, first of all, they're really super enthusiastic because they really want to get into the classroom. They're really eager and they're quite, it's much easier to mold and shape that teacher as opposed to somebody who's very much set in their ways. So somebody with 10 years experience, if they've just been going from school to school, they can be very set in their ways and it is quite difficult to mold them. I mean, maybe they're an absolutely fantastic teacher, don't get me wrong. But I think, often I would prefer to go for somebody straight off CELTA sometimes.
Okay, that is wonderful news for anyone in our audience, because it means if you are just starting your TEFL journey, Glenn would be interested in having you on board.
Absolutely. In fact, the recruitment period sort of starts early April this year. So if anybody's interested in coming to Poland, contact me.
Get your CVs ready.
I had a teacher years ago who said, "Oh, I want to get a proper job after this." And I was like, "What do you mean? This is a proper job."
This is a proper job.
But, that's the thing. There is that mindset where they think it is just a busman's holiday. And that is because there are, backpackers who do end up teaching and, that's their way of generating some income. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for most people, during the interview, I always ask, where do you see yourself 5 years down the line? I mean, there's a classic go-to question in it, but I do that because I want to see what their answer is. And I want to see whether they actually see themselves, this is their career. Okay. Because a lot of people do the CELTA at different stages in their lives. Yes, there are the 20-somethings straight off from university. They got their degree. They don't quite know what they want to do. They don't really want to do anything connected with the degree that they just did, things like, somebody might have just done some history degree or something like that. And it might be maybe it's not that they don't want to, but difficult to find employment. So people do see it as like, they then do the CELTA because they want to travel. So there are people like that. But then there are other people who really see themselves, this is their career, So that's why I asked them that question.
How much do you value the answer that is honest and someone that says, you know what, I don't know if teaching is for me, but it is something I want to explore. I would hope that in 5 years I could be a teacher, but I have to see where this journey takes me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with that. But it's when they say, oh no, I just want to do it just to travel. I just want to do it for maybe like a year and then next year I'm going to go and do something else, then no, it's not a good fit. I also say to them, I say, look, it is hard work working at our school. There will be a lot of teacher development, blah, blah, blah. Is this something for you? Is this something that you want? And if they say immediately yes, that's a really good fit. Even a slight hesitation when they go, yes. No.
Yeah.
No. So that's a key question I do ask right at the end. Yeah.
Good question.
Because you don't, especially in countries here in Central Eastern Europe, you don't go into teaching English to make money. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
If you want to make money, then the Middle East, countries like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
But no, TEFL isn't a lucrative job. But certainly it's a really very interesting job.
And rewarding.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. Definitely.
It's good. No matter who's going into it, there are perks for everyone. If it's someone looking for money, we have places like Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Japan. If it's someone looking to travel, make a little extra money on the side, they can do the TEFL certification and teach online remotely, digital nomad. And then someone who really wants to take teaching seriously then would do the CELTA or the Delta and pick anywhere in the world, really.
Absolutely.
Good.
Join the conversation. Follow us on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and share your thoughts. It takes only 2 seconds. 1, 2, and click now.
So when looking at the TEFL and CELTA versus Delta, how do those certifications influence job prospects and salary?
It's a good question. I think in a lot of countries, it might not influence much, but I think, somebody with CELTA could earn more than somebody with TEFL. Depends. But certainly Delta, yes. But again, you're not really in the world of teaching to earn money, even with Delta, unfortunately. I know there are Delta qualified teachers in the UK who are finding it difficult to get jobs at the moment, full-time jobs at least. But I think, somebody who's got experience and the Delta should earn more. It wasn't the case with me, for example. When I did my Delta 15, 16 years ago, I was working in just a standard private language school and I was earning the same as people without any teaching qualification. I thought, that there's something wrong with that. And so that's why I then went and joined a school like, International House, where I could work my way up the career ladder. Because you can, working at a school like that, you could eventually become the director of studies or something like that. That's exactly what I did.
Speaking of director of studies, so what TEFL certification did you choose to start with, and how did you end up being director of studies?
I didn't actually do the CELTA. I did the equivalent. I did the Trinity certificate TESOL. Purely because I was living in Cheltenham at the time in the UK, and the school that I went for in Lingua offered that course. I think they now actually offer CELTA, but in those days it was Trinity. And I did that. And then I think I was teaching for like 6 years here in Poland. And then I decided, look, okay, obviously this is clearly my career. And so I went and did the Delta. And then I ended up International House. And I was a bit cocky at the beginning. I started as a senior teacher at International House Toruń, and I actually thought I knew it all. Got Delta, 6 years experience. And I started at International House Toruń and I realized, oh, wait a minute. I know not much. I know something, don't get me wrong. But I learned so much in my time at International House Toruń as a senior teacher. And I never did any official, because you can actually through IH, you can do a DOS training course online to help you. Because even like Delta, to be a director of studies for IH, you do need Delta or the DIP TESOL, which is the diploma. It's the Trinity version, but you do need that. But there's not really, I think IH is the only one I think that offers a course to help train you, because during the Delta, it doesn't really train you for being a director of studies. Yes, there is a course design where you can you create your own syllabus and things like that, which obviously is very, very important for being a DOS. But I think, the Delta doesn't actually train you for all those aspects about people management and stuff that you need to be a director of studies.
From everything that you've said, I gather that you are Team Selta. And I think our audience needs to understand a little bit of why. So if you could sum up why Selta is the right choice for someone who is just starting their TEFL career, from someone who is making a career pivot, or someone who wants to develop their active teaching experience. Why is Selta the right choice in your opinion?
It is a very good quality 4-week course by very experienced, trained professionals. A lot of these people are actually quite well known, quite experienced. Okay. So yeah, that's the reason why. And it is a Cambridge certificate. Obviously, you might just say that's a name, but there's so many aspects of being a teacher that they really train. You know, the things I mentioned about, you know, increasing student talking time, even just sort of like how you are in the classroom, albeit an online class or whatever. But yeah, there's so many aspects that it really, yeah. And you know, going back to a TEFL course as well that doesn't have any teaching component, you know, I mean, how can you expect to be a teacher without actually being in the classroom? I'm sorry.
Fair enough. Well, then, if you can be frank about this component, I'm sure you won't shy away from highlighting what the potential cons are for someone looking at a CELTA and a TEFL and thinking, why is the CELTA not for me? Who should not be looking at a CELTA?
Those who just want to travel around the world and just like, you know, but just doing it just to get some extra cash. And, you know, it's just a ways and means to make their money. But at least it's good to start with TEFL, because at least they've got some teaching, you know, like, you know, as I mentioned, you know, 15 odd years ago, and probably in a lot of countries still, it does happen where people do end up in the classroom teaching and they got zero teaching qualifications, and they learn from experience. And obviously after some time, if you're doing it well, I'm sure you are a very good teacher, but you do need to have some initial training course beforehand, definitely.
Okay, so Glenn, for our audience, what advice would you give them, whether they are transitioning into the TEFL or they're wanting to expand their career as an English teacher currently?
Well, do it. Definitely. I think, you know, teaching English is a very, very rewarding job. And it's just a great profession. So please don't shy away from it. But I think if you really see yourself as a professional teacher and this is your career, do start with something like the CELTA. If you have already got the CELTA, or even TEFL, I know a lot of people who've actually done the TEFL who go on to do the CELTA. So that kind of says it all, really. And then, you know, once you've done the CELTA, you know, if you really see yourself, this is your career, then, and you want to branch away from teaching, do the Delta as well.
So, Glenn, you've spent the last 11 years with International House.
Actually, 14 years with International House Toruń, but 11 years as the Director of Studies, yeah.
What is International House? Share with us a little bit more.
Sure. International House is an international house organization, affiliation of schools around the world. And it was started, I believe, just over 70 years ago at International House Cordoba. I think that's how you pronounce it, Cordoba in Spain, by John and Britta Haycraft. And then it really expanded into this worldwide affiliation of schools. And we really, you know, International House really prides itself on professionalism and quality. And it is a good name in the world of TEFL, teaching English. And I know a lot of people would like to get their foot into an international school and work for one of us.
Glenn, please share a few pieces of advice to our audience watching.
Okay. So first piece of advice is ask yourself this question: where do you see yourself 5 years down the line? Because if the answer is being an English teacher, then you really want to start off and do like the CELTA, or then go down the road and do the Delta. You know, it's a profession, so you do need to like invest a bit into it. Yeah, dare I say avoid online TEFL? No, I think, you know, TEFL courses are okay, but as long as there is an observed teaching component. Because as I said earlier, you're not going to learn to drive a car without actually physically being in a car. Okay. And yeah, avoid language schools that won't really promote and invest in your own personal professional development. I was at a school, I won't mention names, years ago. I was straight off the Trinity TESOL, and obviously I was a bit like a rabbit in headlights, am I doing the right thing? And I was working at a language school, and for the entire year, I was not observed once. So I was kind of thinking, okay, I've just done this 4-week course. Am I doing the right thing? I kept questioning myself. I was downloading things off the internet from like onestopenglish.com and things like that. And, it got me through. I had feedback from the owner of the school purely based on feedback from the students. They liked me. But, what do students know? No, they know a lot, but, was I doing the right thing? So I think it's so important to go to a school that does promote professional development and has even if it's just a monthly workshop or something like that, because, any of these courses, the TEFL, the CELTA, they are 4 weeks, and there's still so much more you need to learn and develop as a teacher. And then later on, all these different strings to your bow you can add, like I am like a conference speaker, a magazine writer, and you name it. So, there's so much more to being a teacher. And of course, if you just want to be a teacher, that's perfectly fine, but you still need to develop as well.
I think that is something about teaching that I don't even think it's a teaching thing. It's a people thing, giving and receiving feedback. So the whole reason that the 6 hours is important is so you can receive feedback on how you're doing, what to do better, what you're doing well. And if you don't get that, you don't learn. But I think as people, we find it hard to give especially constructive feedback. Often it's just criticism or we just can't navigate that conversation.
And there are people who just don't want to hear. And these sadly are the people who are very much set in their own ways and they think they're doing great, maybe because the students love them. But, are they actually a good teacher? And I think, it's important. It's important even for me, like after 22 years, to still be observed as a teacher. I think that's super, super important. It's all part of development. We observe teachers at least 2 or 3 times a year for like 40, 45 minutes. We also do drop-in observations at the beginning of the year and things like that. We also encourage peer observations as well, where they can go and watch another teacher. So yeah, I think observations are really, really important, and the feedback as well, because, you're not just, as an observer, you're not just going through a checklist. Oh yeah, tick, tick, tick. You want to give some structured feedback to the teacher for sure.
Does IH offer courses on how to deliver feedback? Because that is a critical component. You can't
there is a course for academic management for giving feedback for observations like that. I mean, I kind of just learned it as I went along. 3 years as a senior teacher and then becoming a director of studies. But there are courses available for that. But it's also something where Delta wouldn't actually. That's the thing. Not really helps. I mean, you are actually observed as a teacher during the Delta, which is stressful. When I did it, my observed lesson from an external observer was about how to teach articles at A2 level in Poland. And of course, in Poland,
there are no articles in the Polish language.
No, so that was, but I nailed it. I'm passed first time. I was very happy with that. I didn't get a merit or a distinction. I was just happy passing first time without having to retake anything. So I was proud of that.
Good. And for someone entering this sphere, how do they begin to gauge what feedback they should take on board versus what they should toss aside?
What do you mean?
How does one know that, for example, if they are given feedback by a peer who says, you should actually approach your lessons in this manner, versus them feeling good about how they approach something, how much of the feedback should they take on?
Well, I think it depends on the peer, of course, but I think, it's good to hear, because you might be doing things in the classroom you don't actually realize. Sometimes I film myself teaching, and you do these weird hand gestures. I've probably been doing it today in the podcast that you have no idea you're doing. So I think it is important to, but I think take it on board, what people say. hopefully they won't be too harsh. I don't think they know. It's just all part of learning and stuff, Be open to feedback. I think is so, so important.
Thank you for today's episode. For all of those interested in getting in contact with Glenn, all of his details will be in the description below. If you enjoyed this, don't shy away from giving us a like or subscribe, or share it with a friend who would be interested in this content. And also, we'd love to hear more from you. So if you have any questions or insights or particular TEFL topics you want more information on, let us know. Glenn, thank you for spending your time with us today. I think you've shed a lot of light for all of our guests, as well as me too. I think you've also given some insight, not only to the TEFL industry, but how that looks in Poland, as well as what options to weigh when choosing the right career. Whether you go down the TEFL route or you choose the CELTA. I hope Glenn was able to help you.
Yeah, the Selta. No, thank you so much, Lisa. Great questions. I've really enjoyed my time. Great podcast. Thank you.
Yay! Like, comment, subscribe. See you soon.